Ice climbing is the art of ascending big, often vertical, sometimes even overhanging pieces of frozen water, using a pair of ice axes and crampons. It's an essential skill to have in general mountaineering, but it's also a sport in and by itself. Just as rock climbers seek out the most impressive pieces of granite and sandstone to try and conquer, ice climbers seek out the most extraordinary ice, which could be anything from glaciers to frozen waterfalls or simply a bit of rock with water running on top of it. Ice climbing could be done free solo, but most often protection in the form of ropes and ice screws are used. It's still a very dangerous sport, however, inherently more dangerous than rock climbing, simply because of the fact that not even the medium on which you climb can be fully trusted. Putting a single ice axe on the wrong spot could be enough to dislodge the entire pillar on which you're hanging, sending it along with you down the mountain. And since the ice is constantly changing, you never really know if it's gonna be good or not until you're actually there. Just because your friends climbed it without any problems last week, doesn't mean it won't send you to destination today. And as if that wasn't enough, the environment is passively trying to kill you all the time as well. So in conclusion, it's cold, it's wet, and it's dangerous. To enjoy it, it seems you need to be just a little bit nuts. Which brings me right to the point of this video. Me. I just watched The Alpinist, which is about the incredible life of Marc-André Leclerc, a Canadian kid who tackled the most difficult mountains in the world in the most difficult conditions, all by himself and just for the fun of it. And I was inspired. I wanted to know just how difficult it is to climb mountains in the middle of the winter, to just hang there on a big chunk of blue ice with nothing but a pair of ice axes and crampons. And as it turns out, I actually know a few friends who practice ice climbing who said they could teach me. So this is the challenge. I've never held an ice axe or worn crampons in my life, but in 1 week's time I want to be good enough at both to be able to climb a 300-meter tall waterfall in Sweden called the... No, like with an O. Without any further preparations, I headed to the north of Sweden to meet up with 2 friends who are complete beginners like me, and a third who is an adequate ice climber who's gonna try to teach us. I want to stress though that this is not a good way to learn. Ice climbing is a serious sport, and if you want to learn it yourself, do so with a certified instructor, not with your bear buddies. We dedicated most of the first day getting familiar with the gear. You could spend days on the topic, but these are the basic things you'll need. Pants, a shirt, mid-layer, shell pants, shell jacket, liner gloves, actual gloves, a helmet, a harness with carabiners, slings and quick draws, mountaineering boots, crampons, ice axes, a belay jacket, a climbing rope, a backpack, and finally, a big smile on your face. You also need ice screws, but I don't have those yet. After a quick theory session, we went out on a lake to try on the gear and practice building anchors. Anchors are basically reinforced protection points, used to belay from on a multi-pitch or to abseil down from. This type of anchor is called an abalakov. It's made by drilling 2 holes at a 60-degree angle to each other that meet at the very end, giving you a tunnel in the ice through which you can then pull the rope or a piece of cord.
Alltså jag känner jag har den och sen så tappar jag den. Okej, vi provar andra sidan. Ja! Så ja.
Then you could either back it up with another abalakov or with an ice screw. Just spending some time walking around in the crampons was very helpful as well. You'd be surprised how easy it is to get stuck on things and stumble in the beginning. You have to really be aware that you don't put your feet too close together or you could get in some real trouble on the mountain. The next day it was time to head out to our first actual climbing spot. A 30-meter long piece of beginner-friendly ice in the middle of the forest. And beginners we were, as Oscar was quick to demonstrate, getting stuck on his own abalakov hook half a meter from the ground.
Det sitter fast.
Jaha!
Ja! He did actually manage to put a pretty big hole in his brand new pants, which is something that's extremely easy to do. Between the crampons, axes and screws, you're essentially walking around carrying hundreds of sharp knives all the time. During the course of this week alone, I was gonna put an ice axe through my jacket and crampons through both my boots and pants, even though I was being as careful as I could. Taking the first faltering steps was scary. I started hammering in the right axe. It only went in a few millimeters, so I didn't really think it would hold me, but I put my weight on it anyway and blindly lifted my crampons as well, and it held. So then I lifted my left axe and put it in another place I didn't really trust. I was incredibly tense as I thought I was gonna fall off the wall any second. But somehow I didn't, so I kept going. As long as the slope wasn't too steep, it just kind of felt like walking on a ladder. Except for that every step was made of glass and could break on you anytime. I thought it was gonna be difficult to judge when you got a good axe placement in the ice, but it actually felt pretty intuitive after a few minutes. You could see just how the blade embedded itself and how many cracks formed and so on, but you could also feel when the blade had really sunk in and couldn't move in any direction. The feet were a bit harder to keep track of, especially when going over a crest where you couldn't even see them.
Tänk på hälen.
Since it was late December and we were almost at the polar circle, the daylight was very limited and we had to put on our headlamps at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd never climbed at night before, but it was surprisingly relaxing, almost hypnotic even. When you just live inside your tiny bubble of light, you can only really focus on the climbing technique, one move at a time. The rest of the world just seems so insignificant and far away. All that matters is here and now. I was so distracted, in fact, that I even forgot I had a camera on my head, so I gave that a good whack too. After about 4 hours of practice, we called it a day and went home to prepare for the next day, which was gonna be a real adventure. One thing that can be difficult about ice climbing is that good spots can be both hard to find and hard to get to. After 1.5 hour drive, we put on our snowshoes to hike the approach up to the icefall. We started walking along a ski-doo trail where snowshoes weren't necessary, but when we had to step off it, we were glad we had them. When we arrived at the top, the sun was at its highest in the sky, and we got a beautiful start to the difficult climb. Unlike yesterday, where it was so flat, you could basically climb no matter the technique. This ice was almost vertical, and proper technique was paramount. We put up top ropes on 2 routes, one with very tough and hard ice, and the other one with so much water flowing on top that you got soaked just after a few minutes.
Helt täckt med is.
Ja, det är jävla dusch där uppe.
Which was kind of annoying, and also an actual problem. A bit of running water may not sound like a big problem, but when it's 15 degrees below freezing, it doesn't take long before your rope is a giant popsicle. When we got back from our lunch break, the rope was completely stuck, frozen into the ice at the top. We had to deal with water running down the rope for the rest of the day, which meant we had to have 2 people on belay, one for just cleaning the ice.
Man får kämpa lite.
Admittedly, I was not able to get more than halfway up the wall, due to the amount of fatigue in my arms just from hanging there. When climbing harder routes, it's so important to do so efficiently, putting as much weight on your feet as possible, and using the natural features of the fall to your advantage, both to keep your center of mass close to the wall and place the axes in spots where you don't have to hammer them in. Sometimes it's best to learn things one step at a time, but most often it's faster to jump into the deep end. Although I won't be able to lead climb these routes in quite some time, I felt like I learned a ton. Day 4 was a recovery day. After practicing some multi-pitch technique at home and packing our bags once again, we felt ready to try the count. So we took the car out to the mountains, pitched our tents, and set off the very next morning. The weather was not what we'd hoped for. With cold temperatures, limited visibility, and wind that almost made you fall over, it was really poor conditions to go out. But time was limited, so we gave it a try anyway. We parked our car and set off on the hour-long approach, hoping the weather would settle a bit, but it only got worse. All the tiny ice crystals in the air stung your face like sharp needles, and the wind was so loud you could barely hear your body shout from an arm's length away. After a little more than halfway there, we decided to turn around and come back another day. Instead, we went to a less exposed crag to practice some more technique on top rope. Visibility was a bit better, but the gusts were still strong enough that we had to tie the ropes to the ground so they wouldn't blow away. At this time, it was starting to feel pretty good. I knew where to place the axes and I started to trust them more and more. I was able to begin focusing on more nuanced issues, such as not overgripping the axes, being as energy efficient as possible on my feet, and thinking about the best axe placement a couple of steps in advance. Small things like that can make a huge difference in how tired you are halfway up the pitch. The 6th day was the last day of the trip, and therefore our last chance to tackle the multi-pitch. The weather was a lot better, so we set off into the waist-deep snow with smiles on our faces. The climb was not very difficult. The first 2 pitches contained some steep parts that got a little bit bumpy, but otherwise it was mostly a pleasant ride. And that was really what we expected to, as the count has a WI rating of 3. We had planned for me to try to lead a few pitches, putting my own protection and building anchors, which I felt pretty comfortable with. But since the clock was ticking, I left it to my more experienced partner.
Ja, jag kommer gå ut åt höger här så att ni slipper få massa is på er. Ja. Så skippar vi det här partiet här.
With our 60 meter long double ropes, we split the 300 meter long climb into 5 pitches, where the last 3 were almost as easy as the first day. We found a few places where you could see through the perfectly clear ice to water flowing underneath. It was probably the coolest thing I got to see all trip. It almost felt surreal.
Han är så jävla dålig på att ge ut. Typ så 2 skruvar.
Although we climbed as quickly as we could, it still takes a lot of time to get up.
De vill inte ha vertikalt länge, vet jag om.
Ja, okej. Nej, men det här borde vara lugnt. Especially when you're new to all the rope handling and anchor building and all the extra bits that comes with multi-pitch climbing. I didn't think we were gonna make it at all. We just pushed through and got in the zone, and before we knew it, we were at the top.
Det är toppen.
Wow. It was a bit anticlimactic, because you didn't actually see anything when you were up there. After catching our breath for a few minutes, we started abseiling down, using the Abalakov anchors we learned earlier. In total, we spent about 8 hours on the ice, but it didn't feel like more than 3. I didn't eat anything and I didn't think anything, I just kept going and the hours went as well. It had been an adventure.
Då är vi typ hemma snart.
Det är bara till att inte bryta benet på vägen ner.
Ja.
So that's it then. I did it. I learned to climb ice in a week. Granted, not the hardest one, and I never got to lead, but I'd still call it a success. And man, was it fun. I recommend everyone who gets the opportunity to try. It's a really unique experience that you can't really get anywhere else. It's a powerful feeling to just be ascending this super slippery, almost vertical rock face that without any gear would simply be impossible. It's like humans were not meant to do this, and yet here you are, cool as a cucumber, getting through it with no problems at all. It's a cool feeling. And it was neither as technically difficult or mentally challenging as I was expecting. I have done a bit of rock climbing before, so that probably helped me a bit, but I think you could do this even if you've never climbed anything in your life. The difficult part isn't necessarily getting up though, it's judging whether what you're doing is safe or not, and that's what you need a guide for. Anyway, if you like the video, or if you don't, please leave some feedback below, because I haven't really done any videos like this before, so I appreciate it. See you next time. Peace.